So today we're going to have a chat about the role of AI in helping to counter the threat of cybercrime, which I guess we are all very familiar with, both in our sort of private and business lives. Maybe a good place to start is if we can just have a little bit more detail about yourself, James, and the company you organise, which is Resistant.ai.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Phil. James Brodhurst, that's me. My role with Resistant.ai is of principal consultant, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a second. My background has always been working in what we could term risk management for businesses, so for corporate organisations. Generally, I've worked for service providers over the years. Based in the UK initially, and quite some time now based out in continental Europe. In terms of risk management, what do we mean by that? Well, helping organisations take decisions where they can help mitigate risks to their business. So that might be the risk of bad debt, it might be the risk of credit risk, so that you take somebody on, offer them a loan or a credit card, and that's a bad risk. But especially and more recently, in the sort of about the last 10 years, I've been focusing on fraud risk. So where there is the risk that a business may lose or their customers may lose out financially from the threat of fraud and related activities. So we sort of put that under cybercrime, which is what we're here to talk about today. And for quite a period working as the head of ID and fraud in the customer solutions team for one of the major credit rating agencies in Europe. I've been with Resistant.ai now for just under 2 months. So we're a scale-up organization based out of Prague in the Czech Republic, but present globally. And we're sort of into our second iteration now of helping businesses tackle cybercrime and cybersecurity, because the founders of the business initially started out back in 2009 working on cognitive security. That was actually the name of the company they founded. That was then subsequently became part of Cisco. So people may know Cisco's cognitive threat analytics platform. That's sort of what our business turned into when it was acquired by Cisco. And then the I suppose second iteration of using AI to help fight cybercrime is what we started in 2019 with the same core team that founded cognitive security. And what do we do in Resistant? Well, I mean, in the simplest sense, we're helping organizations of all types fight the threat of cybercrime. As we'll probably talk about in this session, that's quite a broad area. There's some types of cybercrime which are perhaps more focused on, for example, ransomware, extortion, even politically motivated activities. You hear about state-sponsored terrorism, things like that. We firmly believe you need a little bit of focus in this very wide area. So we're very, very big on the financial part of cybercrime, so helping businesses avoid the monetary losses that unfortunately are a big problem for society, as you were alluding to at the beginning. And how do we do that? Well, we're essentially using artificial intelligence to fight the threat posed by the very well organized resources, people, organizations behind cybercrime. And as we were talking in a separate interview the other day, my colleague Martin came up with quite a good way to sort of describe this, and it's sort of fighting back with the same tools that the fraudsters are using, because you don't want to be taking a knife to a gunfight, and that's perhaps a theme we'll develop a little bit more as we go forward in the interview, Phil.
And in terms, I mean, we all in our daily lives bump into, whether they're genuine stories or more sort of hyped up threats. We're all potentially, as say the headlines maybe exaggerate, or we're cynical and think, yeah, they're exaggerating and stuff. But I guess the basic question is, how worried should we be about cybercrime? As whether it's individuals or as businesses. I mean, how likely are we to encounter cybercrime, I guess, is the starting point.
Yeah, I think we should be worried as a society. So as consumers ourselves, as businesses, as people who work for businesses or operate businesses, I don't think the threat is overestimated at all. And the way I kind of measure these things is just by listening to what we're hearing now. So you can imagine the kind of sort of feed I get, the kind of articles I'm reading, kind of information that's sort of coming my way is focused because I'm working in this business. But when I talk to people sort of outside of the business, I think the perception of the man in the street is that this is a problem. And I think that's good because perception is the first part of understanding that there is a problem there. I don't think it's underestimated. I think if you look at some of the most recent reporting, for example, UK Finance recently reported that first half of last year, so first half of 2021, there was a 20% uplift in detected fraud. So around about £750 million lost to fraud just in the first 6 months of 2021, a big increase on 2020. And then if you look at how businesses are reacting, a very big news story in the last week or so was NatWest in the UK. The amount they're investing in fighting fraud, it's astonishing. I think it was upwards of £1 billion, which is a massive amount of money for anything. So I think there is a greater awareness right now of the magnitude of the challenge. I don't think it's exaggerated. I think also we heard in the UK without stepping into politics, but that whilst in general crime might have been declining, when you add back in fraud, it's not at all. So I think there's a big part of crime right now is fraud. A big part of fraud is cybercrime. So yes, interesting and challenging times.
And in terms of, again, it's quite perhaps a broad question, but are you able to characterize the sort of trend? I mean, everyone I'm sure will have heard of ransomware, for example, they'll be aware of that, but what are you seeing as the sort of global cybercrime trends? And I guess importantly, what impact do they have, on consumers? Does that mean people are less likely, more confident, to use online resources, etc., pay for stuff? Well, yeah. So I guess what are the issues you're seeing, and what is the knock-on effect on consumers and businesses, I guess?
There are an endless list of sort of examples of scams. You mentioned one, ransomware, which is particularly effective. I think it's becoming more pervasive. It's fairly easy to achieve. And again, going back to sort of my yardstick, I've got people who work in some fairly innocuous businesses who suffered from it. Some friends of mine, a person working in a call center, their business was, you wouldn't think would be a specific target for this kind of attack, but at the end of the day, it's about taking down your operations, whatever you're doing, and seeking to as it says on the tin, hold that business to ransom. Many others. Big increase we're seeing in the type of fraud where the consumer themselves is duped into carrying out a banking transaction. We call it authorized pushed payment, where essentially I, as a banking customer, are in some way coerced into making a transfer. So it's not that the fraudsters hacked my bank account and carried out something on my behalf from a remote location. It's actually me who has been fooled, by social engineering, whatever technique, to actually go ahead and make a transfer. Maybe sometimes under coercion, but generally fooling people into doing something that they wouldn't normally do. An interesting one there is it's very hard to detect. It's very hard to separate good from bad there. If James makes a bank transfer, which we do several times a week, when do you know when one of those has been done under duress or with some kind of coercion? So I think sort of coming back to the original question, the inventiveness of the fraudster, of the cyber criminal, is boundless. It really is quite astonishing the way they find ways to take advantage of the latest tech development, the latest development in society. We heard a lot about the massive amount of money handed out in the UK as part of the response to the COVID pandemic. Was it 20% of that was suspected to be fraud, perhaps even higher? The cyber criminals are really, really resourceful. They're really well funded, and some of them are very major organizations in their own right. But equally, some of them are hobbyists because the tech is there to do it, and that's really what we're about in Resistant, is trying to fight the tech that the fraudsters have at their fingertips, with equivalent tech to try and solve the problem.
And in terms of sort of mitigation, are there some sort of obvious and easy things we can do as individuals or businesses to sort of counter the threat of cybercrime, and I'm guessing that as we're talking about the AI technology has a potentially a central role to play in that.
Definitely. I think both consumers and businesses have a role to play. Maybe society has a role to play. I think there's a greater awareness now, to go back to the points we made earlier about the investment being made in fraud prevention. Consumers, I mean, we're the ones who will suffer at the end of the day, as well as, of course, businesses with their reputation of financial losses and so on. But unfortunately, consumers, as we were just saying, often are the weakest link. They're the softest target. They're all we can hope to do is to recognize who we're doing business with as businesses, so know who our customers are, who our consumers are, and realize that not everyone's made equal. The pandemic showed that whilst we could achieve a lot digitally, everything sort of moved online forcibly. That created a number of challenges. There were people who were forcing to operate online, their online banking, who'd never done so before. That creates a lot of challenges. That created a lot of opportunities for the fraudsters. So consumers need to be aware, but I think there's a responsibility there on the part of society and banks or insurers or whoever it might be, whoever they're dealing, who are those consumers are dealing with digitally, to be made aware of the risks. I think we have seen a great uplift in there as well, of that sort of need to make consumers aware. I went and carried out a transfer the other day to a business account for a small payment I needed to make. And actually, I was quite impressed by the level of rigor on the part of my bank to make me aware of just the risks that I might be taking in making a payment to a new payee, which is a classic case of classic scam. We're convinced to make a payment to a let's say business partner of ours, which we use regularly, but all of a sudden the bank details have changed. Is this legitimate? Is it not? So I was quite impressed with the way my bank made me aware at different points during that sort of that transfer journey, if you like. Are you sure this is what you want to do? We're going to check out that this is actually that the business name matches the account number and so on. So a lot of things that the organizations do to make consumers aware of the risks and stop and think, because we all love one-click everything, one-click transfers, one-click shopping. Unfortunately, with that convenience comes a greater risk of being falling for the scams. And businesses, businesses have a role, of course, as we said. What can businesses do? Well, it is about not taking that knife to the gunfight. It is moving at the speed of fraud and recognizing the scale of the problem and applying the tech that's available. And I think the good news is that even if we're living in that sort of one-click world where everything has to be immediate and convenient, the technology has advanced to the point where we can actually make sense of what's going on in real time, and in many cases separate good from bad. We can understand when a good transaction is a legitimate transaction is being made, or when perhaps it's been made under coercion, as we were talking earlier, or there's something just a little bit fishy about the operation that's going on. And technology does play a big part there. AI plays a big part, and that's what we do at Resistant. And if you look at the any number of surveys or recently, it seems that the business customers of ours, business customers that you know about, are all very much committed to applying AI, machine learning to the challenge. I think it's safe to say.
Okay, incidentally, it sounds like you have the same telephone banking organization that I use, because we won't name their name, but yes, I'm always impressed. They make me feel quite guilty sometimes, thinking I'm questioning myself whether I should actually be making that transaction. But you're right, they're very rigorous. But anyway, moving on. Resistant AI, you provide identity forensics, so it'd be good to understand what that is and also how it helps. I mean, you've outlined, I think, sort of a lot of identity-related challenges. So how does identity forensics help with those issues?
Sure, yeah, Phil. Identity forensics. So two words which we think cover off quite well what we do and what we think, more importantly, is necessary to rise to the challenge of cybercrime. On the identity part, this really talks to what I think is really important when you, as a business, are interacting with consumers digitally. Knowing who you're dealing with, and it sounds very sort of simple and easy to understand, but in the past, it would be very easy to understand who you're doing business with. The person would walk into a bank branch or would go and buy insurance policy, through a broker face to face. So that's ancient history now. It's become harder and harder to separate good from bad, to know who you're dealing with. Who's the identity of the person behind the browser, who's opening a bank account, who's issuing a buy now pay later transaction, who's applying for an insurance policy or making a payment. If you can get that identity right, so if you know that it's Phil who's doing that bank transfer, and you with a certain degree of security, and you don't have to introduce too much friction for the consumer, then you've kind of cracked the identity challenge. The other part of what we do, so the other part of identity forensics, is it's become necessary to dive a lot deeper into the data around someone's identity and the transactions they're carrying out, where they are when they carry out that transaction. The whole series of signals, as we could call them, which are associated with a digital interaction between a consumer and an organization. And the forensics part really is intended to encourage a deeper look at just exactly what's going on, because cybercrime fraud, solving that challenge never exists in isolation. You can't just put up a huge wall in front of your business, because your good customers won't get around that wall. You need to kind of make it transparent for the good customers, which is it's a huge challenge. You can't just do a whole series of checks every time somebody wants to make a bank transfer, because that's going to generate a huge amount of friction. So solving the identity challenge in a very forensic way is really what we do with Resistant. And data really is at the heart of everything. I mean, data drives all of our lives. I mean, everyone knows that. It's all about the data that we're sharing, providing. Unfortunately, the fraudsters, the bad guys, the cyber criminals are also leveraging our data. It's very easy now to create an identity or steal an identity, and then go about your fraudulent business. So making sense of that information in real time without too much friction is one of the big challenges that we have to try and solve.
I think you've alluded to it's clearly quite a complicated situation, but are there some obvious things that businesses can do to effectively manage identity to hopefully minimize their risk to cybercrime?
Yeah, definitely, Phil. In short, it's to be able to make use of all the information that you can gather in the shortest time possible to shine a light on often what is quite a dark world of digital interactions. So if somebody's applying for a credit card or an insurance policy online, there will probably be some credit checking done there. Does this person exist? So what we call identity validation is your social security number if you're in the US, your ID card number in Europe, your driving license number in the UK. Is that a valid number? Does that exist? Does that actually, is that a valid reference for the identity in question? Then you need to verify the person, and there are many different ways of doing that, and there's different levels of rigor depending on which your business you're in. But often that's not enough, because that kind of information, unfortunately, is freely traded on the web. So it's not too hard to go and get a hold of that set of information that you need to bypass those checks. So you need to look deeper. So in digital interactions, we can learn a lot from where a person is and whether they're good or bad, from the device they're using, where they're located, whether we've seen their digital presence in other transactions, because it wouldn't be normal for you and me and a few other people who don't have any common or obvious relationship. Why would we all be applying for loans in a 10-minute period from the same device? That would be highly suspicious. So just one example of enriching the information that you use to make decisions about whether to give James a credit card, whether to let Phil have that insurance policy or carry out a bank transfer. Extending the data set as far as you can and making decisions on that information in real time. So that's the sort of the challenge we're facing now. And I understand. So the second point really is for businesses to understand just how the cybercrime ecosystem works. It's a complex underworld. It involves a lot of players who are either fabricating identities, stealing them, creating them through techniques such as human farming, providing that sort of set of information that can then be used in nefarious ways. That information will then be traded. So there's a whole ecosystem there of online trading of information, of data, identities of data. There'll be other people using that data to figure out whether it's useful or not, whether it gets past credit checks. And then there'll be the ones who are actually using it to commit the fraud or the cybercrime. So it's quite a complex ecosystem. But because that's a sort of a life cycle of sort of fraud from the beginning to the end, how this is carried out, there are different points at which we can intervene and try and detect, for example, if my identity might be being traded on the dark web, or are we seeing multiple applications coming into our bank or our insurance company, which seem to be related in some way. Those are the kind of techniques that we would recommend that businesses look at, and to do so in real time, requires some fairly advanced number crunching, which is where artificial intelligence and machine learning come in.
Okay, so I'm just wondering, you've alluded, I mean, most of this seems to be, there seems to be a financial motive to most, obviously there's a lot of issues around stealing people's identity data, but they don't do that just for fun. It's because then part two is there's a monetary reward, as you say, whether it's selling this on to somebody else who's then going to commit the crime. So financial cybercrime is that sort of the biggest driver of all of these problems we have around security, IT security.
I think it's a very, very large part. Yeah, for sure. It's the part we focus on. There are, of course, other dimensions to cybercrime, and which is sort of any crime done in a digital way. So there will be perhaps crimes that are going on which don't have a financial impact. Even there are the cybercrime going on, which people just do for fun because they can, trading Netflix accounts, which you think, well, there's not really any harm in that, is there? But there is, sooner or later. And often the fraud aspect or the financial element of cybercrime is just the start of a long chain of fairly unsavory activities. Often fraud will be funding other crimes, human trafficking, drug trafficking, and so on and so on. So it's a sort of a fairly dark ecosystem of connected crimes. But yes, the financially motivated cybercrime is a huge part, for sure. Just going back to that number from UK Finance, 750 million lost in 6 months just in the UK in the first 6 months of last year. When you add that all up around the world, it's clearly a massive problem.
And I'm also wondering as well, because thanks in large, I guess, to technology and the online world, of the whole variety of sort of what you call alternative finance options are out there now, sort of buy now, pay later. You've got all these digital challenger banks, and I guess decentralized finance as a sort of. So I'm just wondering whether those kind of digital financial, transactions are themselves, causing much more issues around cybercrime, as opposed to the day when I'd have wandered into the bank and handed some money over, or written somebody a check. Is the whole digital world just exaggerating, exploding all that cybercrime potential?
No, it's an interesting area, and if you a very quick sort of search on Google for this kind of alternative financial services and the fraud risk, if you like to put it that way, or cybercrime risk, I think it's just another example of how the cyber criminals are taking advantage of the next big thing. So if we look at buy now, pay later, or the neobanks, very, very convenient and hugely successful alternative finance, if you want to call it that. I think the percentage of buy now, pay later in the US is about 4.5% of all e-commerce transactions now, and it's on the increase. It's clearly a massive success story. I mean, just the number of organizations we know who are either already in or getting into buy now, pay later shows you that it's it's becoming one of the preferred means of making payments or financing purchases. I think it's an interesting area because the convenience factor again comes into play. and without getting into regulation of those businesses, which certainly in the UK is something which seems to be gathering pace, concern around whether that kind of means of finance is worth regulating. I think it is building, but the sheer volume of those businesses means that they have to be able to rise to the cybercrime challenge in some very challenging circumstances. I think those organizations are quite well placed because they tend to be techie, which is not a very generous description, but it does help. Most of those kind of organizations are fully conversant with, the need to use artificial intelligence, machine learning to make decisions. So we find when we're working with them that they kind of get it, but they are facing some competing challenges. A lot of these businesses are their number one priority is to grow, and often you might see that that growth objective perhaps is prioritized over questions such as fraud prevention. The real-time nature of the business is a challenge as well. That's why they do need to face the cybercrime challenge with the right tools, let's say. I think in terms of, you hinted at decentralized finance. If we talk about crypto, I think crypto probably gets a very, very bad rap. It gets there's a lot of negative press around crypto, possibly because of the convenience. I was actually at a conference last week 2 weeks ago in London on sort of financial crime, and learned quite a lot actually from some of the evidently more reputable crypto exchanges and crypto organizations. I think the good thing again about them, that those organizations, which people don't perhaps realize, is that they are fully digital. They're capable of tracking everything, because they're actually much better at tracking what's going on than perhaps the traditional organizations. But again, the convenience factor comes into play, and I suspect that this kind of neobanking, alternative finance will come under more scrutiny, just because being such convenient ways to pay or transfer funds or make purchases or finance purchases means that they are also, unfortunately, often the preferred instruments of the cyber criminals.
Just one slight supplementary. It's always intrigues me. I mean, at the moment, in general terms, if a consumer is a victim of some kind of fraud, certainly the banks would tend to step up and make good that, unless they think that consumer's been a complete sort of moron, for want of a better phrase. But I get the hint that they're beginning to try to want to push back a bit more and make us more responsible for our financial transactions, online and stuff. Is that happening, and does that worry you, or do you think it's right that we as individuals need to step up and take more responsibility? Or do you think if we're being encouraged to do things digitally, then the people encouraging us should carry on having that responsibility for us?
Yeah, I think we'll always have to be a shared responsibility. It has been for a long time. If you queried a transaction on your credit card, the bank would not quibble there. They would reverse the transaction, and you wouldn't suffer. Where you've carried out a banking transaction, where you've logged in with your account, and it's you who's done it, there was a lot more pushback from the organisations there, and there were many cases of people having suffered from that kind of authorized push payment fraud, where they've been coerced into doing something, but they did it in their name. It was me who made that banking transfer. But even that has come under more scrutiny, sort of as the sort of financial responsibility kicks in. There's no point just pushing that back to the consumers, because as a whole, society is then going to suffer. So it's always going to be a shared responsibility. And I think that whether it's legislation or whether it's just good common sense, that has to evolve. But as technology evolves, and as these new ways of doing business and new ways of doing finance appear, and also there's a lot of variance around this geographically. The UK is often led with with the FCA, for example. I live in continental Europe. It's not the same in every country. So I think that creates a lot of challenges for also for multinational organizations, that it might not be the same in each place. But yeah, definitely shared responsibility, and sort of something that has to evolve and keep pace with the evolution in technology and sort of society as a general, as a whole.
We've covered a fair amount of ground, and maybe it sort of in closing, it'd be good if you could not summarize everything, but maybe pick one or two, must do. So, because I say cybercrime impacts everyone, both in their private lives, business. Are there one or two sort of key bits of advice you'd give people in terms of, how they can keep themselves as safe as possible? I mean, I know some people, but some people seem to think that, you can't protect yourself, so you inevitably are going to become a victim. So it's more a question of mitigating that or reducing the number of times that happens. And other people still seem to suggest that you can keep yourself completely protected. I mean, what are your thoughts on that, and what advice would you give, I suppose?
I think for consumers, use your common sense. Also, as we were talking about when we were, I think, using probably the same bank for doing some transfers, go a little bit more slowly. Think about what you're doing. Don't rely on somebody else to fix it for you. So use common sense. It's quite easy to raise your level of defense. And I'll happily confess that up until possibly, I suppose 3 or 4 years ago, I wasn't using in an assiduous way, second factor authentication, whereby if you log into your Google account from a new device, you get a second challenge. And I look back now, I think that, my God, I couldn't live without that now. I wouldn't feel safe. So that kind of, sort of helping yourself mentality, I think is important. And I think you sort of touched on something I would have put in a very similar way. In the fraud management world, we sort of start off from the point where you don't trust anybody, which is not a great thing to say, but it's not a bad place to be, although it's not the only solution. So be a little bit suspicious, take advantage of the tools that are there, take some simple precautions. Everybody loves social media. A lot of people share a lot of information there, which is a little bit risky. Yeah, those are the kind of things for consumers and businesses. It really is about not taking that knife to the gunfight. Trying to get the best possible tools, data, and analytics that you can, and try to at least keep pace with the evolution of fraud and cybercrime. It is a massive challenge, but the tech is there to help. It can help. It does work quite well, and never stop innovating. Complacency is a bad thing, because the cyber criminals, the fraudsters, are just the opposite of complacent. Very, very well resourced, very innovative, and very fast moving, which I think we saw during the pandemic. How they will adapt to the opportunities presented to them.
So it's been lovely to chat to you, James. So thank you very much indeed for your time. Thank you.
Pleasure, Phil. Take care. Thank you.